Welcome to the K Factor podcast, where we explore the real journey behind success, the struggle, the growth, and the lessons that shape who we become. I'm Rabbi Yehoshua Worthy, director of CHYE, a nonprofit dedicated to helping entrepreneurs and career seekers build the Keli for their parnasa and a life of purpose. Shalom Aleichem, everybody. Welcome back to another exciting edition of the K Factor podcast. We're here to take you on a journey through entrepreneur's story so that you could learn from the lessons. And this week, I'm very excited. This is one of our proud alumni here at CHYE. Many of you are familiar with him he's been on the COL and other news stories from his very, very exciting startup journey that he's been on. He started a startup, which was just a raw idea, and he took it, and he got investors, and he built it, and then he partnered, and then he exited, and he went through like a full entrepreneurial cycle, very exciting, and I'm proud and excited to welcome today Levy Sudak to the K Factor podcast. Welcome, Levi.
Thank you, Rabbi. It's good to be here.
Yes, it's very exciting. You're one of our, proud CHYE stories, and it's always a pleasure to talk with you. The K Factor style, we like to take people on a journey. Our audience is young guys coming out of Yeshiva and Kollel, and they're trying to figure out what their next steps are, and they love to hear how people made that transition. So we're going to go back in time. There you were. First of all, tell us a little bit about, your background. Where did you learn? Which yeshivas did you go to?
Sure. So, I went to a couple yeshivas, but went through the Lubavitch yeshiva system, and then I always knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. But I went through the system. Was taught that was the right thing to do, so I did it. And then afterwards, I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. So I thought, what could I do? My father was in parking. He built this parking concept, which was automatic parking enforcement based on cameras. As a kid, I didn't necessarily appreciate, what he was doing and the benefits to most people because it's typically aggressive. But on the other hand, having parking tickets replace towing and booting for parking enforcement is a much more user-friendly or customer-friendly way to enforce parking. And ultimately in England, towing was banned as a result of the private parking enforcement industry moving towards ticketing. And when I got towed, I thought I understood that this is a much better way to do stuff. And I thought, I needed an edge when I came out of Yeshiva. I needed something that I could at least tell investors I'll be successful because I have an edge over everyone else. And my edge was that I knew the industry well. I watched it grow out of the garage in the back of my house to something that was, the way parking was enforced in England. And I said, I'll copy the business model, do it in the US. And when I was ready to start my company, a friend of mine, Mir Simchet, I'll shout out to him. He's a good friend, and he told me CHYE are good people to talk to. So I picked up the phone. I said, I sat down with you. I pitched the company, and you said, I have an introduction to make for you, and you introduced me to Daniel.
So one second, before you talk about that next step, I just want to talk about two things. One is I just want to emphasize one important thing you said, which is really important when someone's starting a business, especially in a crowded market. What's your edge? What's your standout? A lot of people they come to us at CHYE, they want to start something, but what makes you stand out from everyone else? That's so you had that luxury, Baruch Hashem, where because you grew up with it, you had that edge, which gave you that head start, which was it's very important. Everyone should try to look for that competitive edge that they have, no matter what business they're going into. And I'll also just quote an interesting, we once did a panel discussion, and the Hebrew Free Loan Society, which is a great organization here in New York and the tri-state, they lend to new businesses. And they said they found from their data, obviously the businesses that did the best were the people that went into the business with prior experience. So it's very powerful, very important. So before we talk about that next step, so here you grew up with this technology in England, and you came here to America, and it was non-existent here in America, but this was like the Wild West.
Yeah, no one was using cameras for automatic parking enforcement on private land, for sure not. I think there were some maybe rare examples of government using it, but definitely for private parking enforcement it wasn't done, and even for government it was barely done.
So basically, you saw what they called the blue ocean, right? Instead of the red ocean, which is those competitors. You saw basically that this was wide open, and you wanted to bring it here to America, right? So you reached out to us, and anyone that's trying to start a business and looking for resources, reach out to CHYE. So remind me, what happened next?
So when I reached out to you, I needed $60,000 to prove the concept, and 30,000 I was able to fundraise from some friends, and it was 10,000 each. And then you introduced me to Daniel, who himself and with another friend gave me the next 30,000, and that was the money I used to prove the concept. Fund my first installation, a little bit of legal work, pay for a developer. Like that was all I needed to just not build a business, but just prove that it worked. Getting my first few dollars in the door, that was enough to get that done. Then I had to raise more money, but that was a good, that was you helped me. That money helped me validate the product.
So let's pause and talk about that. Very important. Again, for a lot of businesses, they jump in head first. It's like this concept of idea, validating your idea. So how do you actually go about doing that? What did you do?
So I said, once I have customers and it actually generates revenue, I know it's something real.
Right.
And I wanted to. I mean, I knew there were a few risks. The business was done in England, but why wouldn't it work in America? Well, maybe there was a legal risk. So my first money that I spent, and that was even before I raised money, is I spoke to lawyers and said, "Hey, is there a reason why this wouldn't work in America?" They gave me a legal opinion that I'd be able to do it over here. And then the business relies on being able to do DMV searches to know who the driver is. So I just researched and was able to get some DMV searches. So that was basically free. That was my first validation that it actually works. And then I guess the next level of validation is, could I sell? Now that was a lot harder because I didn't know how to sell. I was a yeshiva bacher and never had experience selling.
Right. I remember actually CHY operates a little WeWork in Crown Heights, a workspace, and used to come and make those cold phone calls
Yeah.
here.
So that was brutal. I didn't know what I was doing then, and I guess the next level of validation is not just does the concept work, but will I be able to make it work?
Well,
Um,
one second. Since you're talking about those phone calls, and a lot of people struggle with that, that a big part of the business is to make a sale. How did that work? How did you get your first client?
so I'll share what I did, and the mistakes I did that would have saved me some time. I started by picking up the phone to anyone with a parking lot, and trying to pitch them my parking enforcement services, whether it was a landowner with some apartment units, whether it was a restaurant, a shop, a store, and that was basically getting 100% no's. Like no one was interested in talking to me. Um, I got my first sale from a parking conference. I would fly down to them. I first got excited by the big CEOs who would give me a little bit of attention and say they're going to use me, but then they would be impossible to get hold of. But then I went to a small regional parking show. The way the parking industry works is there's like three big parking shows that the big shots will go to, um, like three times a year. And then there's like small regional shows that will be in every state. And then you're going to get more like local players. And I was able to actually, it was the biggest parking company in America at the time. It was called SP Plus. Now it was bought by a Jew. It was like they were a public company. A guy called Alex Israel. He privatized it. It's now Metropolis. So I got my first parking lot was from a regional manager who was by a show. And he who was it was actually in Houston, which is funny because Daniel's from Houston. So I had my first business, success both in investing, raising money, and with a customer who was out of Houston. He said, I have a parking lot in Fort Worth that might work for you. So I drove up to Fort Worth, and I saw that I was able to make it work. I told him that. He's like, okay, I'm in. Like, I drove back to Houston. I was like singing the whole way back down. I was so exciting.
So you had to install your own technology on these parking lots?
Yeah, I had to. So we think the I don't think I raised money until I made that sale. I think until I told my investors, once I make a sale, you guys could wire the money, and then I didn't. In between them giving me the contract, and in between them giving me the contract and actually needing to install the cameras, is when I paid a developer, my cousin. Shout out to the other Levy Sudak, who's a developer. I paid him to build my proof of concept, and if I was able to use that time to build a technology that would detect the violations. But the big sales lesson that I learned then was that I had to go to the people whose problem I'm solving is on their mind. So what's the problem I'm solving? Is people have a problem with parking enforcement, or people are stealing their land, let's say.
Just to clarify for people that are listening, in other words, if you're operating a parking lot, there's people that will come there and they'll just park their car and leave it for weeks, months.
Or even for an hour, but they're not. But you're supposed to use it to go to a store, and you're using it to go somewhere else. Now there's one space less for a customer, or you're supposed to pay for parking and you're not paying for parking.
One second. So your technology can also track where somebody goes and prove that they didn't go to the store that they were supposed to.
So typically, no. So we're either duration based. So say, oh, you're allowed to park for an hour, you stay for two. That would be one way we could enforce, or it will be for, if you pay for parking, you're supposed to pay for parking, and you don't pay for parking, we know all the license plates that paid, and if you're not on that list, then you're in violation and you get a parking ticket. So I mean, that's land that people invest in. They have a mortgage. They want to fund their mortgage, and by not paying, you're just stealing land from them. Funny, parking is the only asset people think they have the right to steal. Like, no one says, "Oh, I'm not going to pay rent," but people say, "I'm not going to pay for parking unless there's a parking enforcement guy." So we help asset owners make sure that the land that they pay for is being used the way they want it to be used.
There you are. You proved your concept. Now you have a customer. You took on the investors. What was the next step?
Before I go there, I think it is like an important lesson that I learned from selling, which is back to why I was at CHYE, knocking my head on the wall for a couple months and not getting anywhere, and then there was finally a switch that I was able to get somewhere. And I think in terms of lessons from entrepreneurship, this is a big one. Is that I was trying to solve problems for people who maybe had that problem, but it wasn't on their mind. So let's say, I don't know, someone's running a restaurant, or someone's running a store, and they have a parking abuse problem, so they hire a tow truck company. And what am I telling them? Switch out from your old-fashioned way of doing it to a better way of doing it, and it's going to be less problematic, less hurtful to the people that you're taking enforcement action against, and it's going to bring you revenue that's unrealized. Now, when I pitch to someone that's running a store, they're only thinking about how am I making money from my store. And if they have a parking problem, they want to go with the default way parking is done. They don't want to deal with innovation in parking. They want to deal with innovation in selling whatever they're selling in their store. Whereas, when did I start getting success? When I went to the people that actually were thinking every day about how do I maximize revenue from a parking lot, the parking operators. And then I was able to start getting some interest. So like when you're starting to sell and starting to provide value for the market, it's really important to work out who's thinking about the problem I'm solving, and not just try to throw darts at everyone who might be able to benefit from your solution. So that was the big lesson I learned. It took me those months of just getting told no every day to learn that lesson. But I think that was was an important lesson that would
You
be
got to find your
for people.
target market, your early adopter. Are those the right terms?
Yeah, I would say, yeah, find out who's going to be your early adopters, and even if your target market is much wider than that, your early adopters are the people that you're solving the problem for the most. So think of who am I solving the problem for the most, and try to work with them. What actually ended up happening is I after I got my first sales, I ended up partnering with a guy who was in the enforcement space. And he was
1 second.
actually
Let's you're jumping to the. I want
yeah,
to
but
take the.
I'll go back to that, but it's relevant. Um,
Yeah.
because when the person I ended up partnering was in the enforcement space, now technically a competitor, and he ended up bringing me from 4 parking lots to like 50 parking lots, and ended up being my partner, and we ended up scaling to like 200-300 parking lots together. And the reason why he took my business and he really invested in taking my business from basically 4 parking lots all the way up to 300 was because I solved more of a problem for him than I solved for the random parking operator, because the parking operator was thinking about general parking revenue and he was only thinking about enforcement revenue. So for the parking operator, I was increasing his revenue by, let's say, 5%. My business partner, who was originally a customer, I ended up increasing his business by 5x what he was doing, because he was only making the enforcement revenue. So that's an example of the lesson is I was giving him more value because he was only focused on that little niche than I was giving to the parking operator, than the shopkeeper. So it's always like finding the person and giving the most value. It's really important to start with. That was the lesson I learned.
Okay, so that's very insightful, and so just keeping people on the arc of the story. So there you are. You prove your concept. You got your first customer. Then you started building up to multiple customers. How was that journey? In other words, once you had your first customer to get more customers, how challenging did you find that? And what were the lessons you learned from that?
Yeah. So once you actually start having customers, your problem goes from an emotional turmoil of not wanting to have a business and not having one, to actually needing to deliver, and it comes challenging in that way. It's much easier than the emotional problems of just being a solar founder and wanting to have a business and not having one. But then you need to deliver. So I mean, that's practical. You think I had to hire a developer. I had to hire an administrator to help me with the DMV requests and the customer complaints, and just so built that up and started selling. Got to 3 parking lots, and then randomly, out of the blue, I get a call from my business partner, who later became my business partner. At the time, he just was a customer, and saying he's got a portfolio of 300 parking lots, and he wanted to try my product out. So he did, and he ends up, because he was focusing on parking enforcement again, as I mentioned, he we ended up he ended up 5xing his revenue, and he was like, "Wow, I want to put this everywhere." So for me, it was like, once I started getting traction, then it really went like the hockey stick. Hashgacha Pratis, this guy just found my website, and so I would be a good fit, and he brought me to there, and that's what changed me from being
So
someone
let
that.
me ask you the following, though, since you're talking about that. So there you were. I mean, it must have been very exciting for you. You saw how these companies were getting excited about your product. Why would you want to partner with him and then have to split when you could have just run on your own, and maybe you could have been the full owner once you saw how interested people were? What was your decision making that it was worth it for you to partner versus going solo?
No, that's a good question. It's actually it was, I had a lot of arguments with investors of should I do it? Some investors, should I go partner with him? Should I just try to do it solo? Um, I'd say, for the first part, I got to, instead of working and finding parking lots by myself, I was able to leverage what he brought to the table. He brought a lot to the table. He had both money and distribution. So instead of me needing to build out a whole development, a whole sales system, raising a ton more money, building up the disputes and accounting and a bunch of pieces he already had in place. So I was able to partner with him, and he ended up taking a majority of the company, but I was okay with that because it accelerated me so much. And then the reason why I was able to exit so quickly and build up so quickly was because I had a partner that I was able to leverage. And I believe the key word for me in business is leverage. How am I leveraging either what I have, what my partners have, and that partnership was a huge source of leverage for me. That I was able to go from, instead of fighting for every little parking lot, I was able to suddenly get 50 and then 100. It was a big deal. And besides for that, the it is very hard having 2-3 parking lots. The industry doesn't take you that seriously. So, for example, parking integrations, it's really important to be able to talk to the parking companies. And when I had 3 parking lots, it was very hard for me to get the industry's attention. When my partner was already dealing with, a couple hundred parking lots, it was much easier for me to tell them, hey, we have a real chunk of business that we're doing together. Let's make all our lives easier by working out an integration or stuff like that. So there's also power in having industry insiders. And it was also helpful, when we dealt with, as the business grew, you deal with like lobbying challenges, and the towing companies don't like that you're pulling away their business, so they end up lobbying against you. And how do you deal with that? So just having someone that was in the business for 15 years was definitely the right call for me. It's one of those things that if I was starting now with my experience, would I do it myself? Probably. Um, because I'm a lot more experienced than I was then, and a lot of what he brought to the table, I was able to. I have now, but it was 100% the right move for me when I was less experienced and I had less access to capital. Um, to have a partner, and maybe I would partner with him today and just take a bigger percentage. But back then, with my experience back then, it was 100% the right thing for me to do, to take someone that was a little more experienced, had more distribution, and had more capital, so that I didn't need to raise from other investors.
So you spoke all about the reasons why it was worth it for you to partner, but let's talk for a second just a little bit about being in a business partnership with someone else. What are important things people should have in mind to make sure that relationship is a healthy relationship ongoing?
Um, no, it's a good question, but it was a really good partnership. So we didn't have many challenges. We both respected what we brought to the table. So it just
So you
worked
just
out.
got lucky. You're saying it was just the right guy. It was like a good.
Yeah,
It went,
it was like when, there are
did you
times
get a
when
partnership agreement before you started the partnership?
well, at first we tiptoed in. So he was first a customer, and then all my resources was going to his business. So I had a problem. I didn't have any customer diversity. I was basically all servicing him, and he had a problem that he didn't own his intellectual property. So both of us wanted an exit. We were both aligned on that, and we both knew that we would be more valuable as a merged company than separate companies. So it just made sense for us to merge. But it wasn't something that we just did day one. We first had a client agreement. I was getting paid, as a technology provider, and then we ended up merging the companies together.
Okay, so there you are now. You're a merged company, and then the growth starts to accelerate, and you transition into a new role now. So this is very important for people to know. When you're in the starting up at the startup phase at the very beginning, you're hustling, you're all alone. Now all of a sudden you're part of a team. How did you adapt, and what was your new role that you took on in this combined larger company?
I would say it doesn't. It's not just it switches your large company and your role switches. I think as a startup founder, your role is always switching. From day one. As a startup founder in the early days, if you're making progress, then your role never stays the same. You go from pitching and selling the whole time to actually needing to deliver. You go from trying to work on stuff with whatever scrappy resources you have, and try to actually learning how to hire resources to take care of stuff. And You go from hiring, needing to deal with a small team to a larger team. Um, you need to deal with accounts payables. So you go from knowing every single bill that you have to like needing to have a system that things don't get um, you've that things don't you don't miss bills and then suddenly get surprised later. To every parking lot, and then you need to learn how to manage teams that know every parking lot. So it's always evolving. It's not like, oh, you suddenly partner and then your job changes. It's always evolving, and the way I would do it is I would always like look at the challenges that I had the next month, or I was able to see like very short window ahead. I didn't know like what was going to be in a few months. I just knew what are the challenges that I'm dealing with right now, and then I'd find books on it. I would find.
Well, what role did you take on in this new combined company? What was your major responsibility?
So that first at first it was I was responsible for the product, so for delivering the product, and then my business partner was responsible for the sales. Um, and then it evolved to us both preparing to sell the company, and that was the last. The last bit was just we
Yeah, I
hired.
want to talk about that in a minute. I'll put that. Hold on a second before we get to there. So, before we get, in the journey now that you're this new form company and things are growing, was there any particular new challenges that you faced that you weren't expecting?
Um, there are always challenges that I'm not expecting, but again, it's not like there's challenges as a merged company or it's just keeps on being challenges. The business is always having challenges. Um, and you're always kind of, and especially a business as aggressive as ours, parking enforcement, you start making progress and doing well, and then suddenly you get a punch in the gut. It could be like, if got subpoenaed from the AG, the Florida AGs. They send a subpoena for deceptive trade practices because they are getting so many complaints about my company, which is fair because we're in parking enforcement and people paying us don't like us very much. And we tell our customers that we take their 1-star reviews so they get to keep their 5-star reviews. Like we take the abuse, which is fine, but the Florida AG was suddenly getting a bunch of complaints that it wanted to investigate. And the way they send out their subpoenas is under deceptive trade practices. So that was very scary for me as a probably a 24-year-old back then, seeing the state of Florida investigating me for deceptive trade practices. Or then there's one day that the towing lobby lobbied Broward County to shut us down. So I wake up I turn on my phone after Yom Tov, and like 70% of my business back then was in Broward County, and we're suddenly told, "Hey, we need to shut down Broward County." We ended up not needing to shut down, but that was very scary.
Well, tell us some more detail. Sounds very exciting. Why didn't you have to shut down? What happened?
So there was a clause, basically something. It was unconstitutional for them to interfere with contracts that we already had in place. So anything that we weren't allowed to grow in Broward County until we were able to sort out the law, and put in lobbying efforts ourselves. But anywhere where we were already doing business, they wrote the law in a way that grandfathered us in because they weren't allowed to interfere with previous contracts. So we weren't able to grow in that place, but we weren't shut down. But that took a few days.
So basically, a business should expect if they're going to see success, and they're in their success, they're going to be pushing away at other businesses. There's going to be a fight.
Yeah. If you're innovating, then you're probably upsetting some people, and those people actually don't just go away. They like to kind of protect their business. So
at this point, is it fair to say that the type of parking technology that your company provided is become adopted across the country?
Yeah, it's becoming more popular. If you go to the parking shows, it's like everyone's selling this sort of system. It's not niche. When I was pitching it, no one was.
Right. Actually, this is the question I want to ask: is they say if you don't have competition, that means you don't have a business. So you're here. You are. You're creating this business. Was that something you had to deal with? Was there other people that tried to jump in and take away your thunder, if that's the right word to use?
You're saying,
Competitors. Yeah,
yeah, so there are competitors at the market. The market for parking is so big. Everyone parks a couple times a day. Like, the problem, our competition isn't. There's enough room in the market for a few successful companies. So that's not what we're worried about.
got it. So there you are. You're now with your new partner, and your business is growing and growing. So talk a little. You're speaking about the exit. A lot of people actually. This is very important. It's actually a choice that you have to make when obviously, for the right type of business. Do you want to? Is this going to be your lifestyle business that you're going to stay with and build for years to come, or are you going to go for an exit, which is where you sell the company to larger? So what was your thought processes in this? Why did you choose the path of going for an exit?
Um, so from day one, I told my investors that there's an exit plan. I said, um, put in money, I'll 10x it, and they ended up doing more than 10xing. But um, that was, that's how I saw the business from day one. And partly I looked at it as like my business school. I knew I didn't know what I was doing, and I was like, "Hey, this will be my business that I can make a bunch of mistakes on, and then I could always restart." Um, and and then also I knew that it's very capital intensive, because we fund installations, we fund camera installations. So even though the business is profitable, you're not able to take home a lot of money whilst you're building the business unless you borrow on the business, which is something I didn't know about. We didn't have a whole um, like finance department that was able to leverage the business with loans. So all I knew was equity, and I knew that I wanted to to take home money and just have a good cash cushion. So that was kind of the mindset when I started, and it's like what I was working towards. Um, like, yeah, now when I look at a business exit, I tell people, like, I'm starting another business now, and I tell people I'll evaluate an exit in 5 years. Like, I'm building this for 5 years, and then I'll see if I want to go for another 5 years. But back then, my mindset was like, no, I'm working towards. I'm not going to take out a lot of money from the business right now, but then there'll be an exit, and that's going to be my payday. And I was always looking forward towards that payday. That was what was motivating me to put in all that time, effort, and energy.
So you guys went out looking for people, or they came looking for you?
Um, we it was both. We put it out in the market that we were selling. We actually hired a CEO to help us sell. The CEO ended up bringing in one of his investors he was working for another company that sold to private equity, and he ended up connecting us with them. They ultimately bought the company, but in the meantime, we ran a sales process. We had an investment banker um, show the market that we were available to be bought, and we did a little roadshow, pitched a bunch of people, got a few offers, and then ended up selling with the people that came in that came in the highest.
Very exciting. So was there any drama in that in that process? Was it?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of checkboxes and a lot of due diligence questions, um, and they send you a whole Excel spreadsheet with like hundreds of questions that you answer and you think that's it. And then as soon as you're done, they send you another one and say, yeah, we didn't want to scare you day one. So we kind of drop fed you the questions. So it's a lot of work. Um, we weren't very well prepared. So it dragged on. I was actually talking about a shahar process. It was very lucky that it dragged on because, um, I tried selling like 4 years after I started my business, and there's a tax incentive for entrepreneurs called QSBS, Qualified Small Business Stock. And what that means is that if you start a business, invest in a qualified business, which there's a bunch of criteria of what qualified means, but typically a technology startup um, will qualify, and like they say specifically finance companies or real estate don't qualify, but I mean, anyone that's interested should look up QSBS themselves. And back then, it was for $10 million that you pull out, if you hold it for 5 years, it's tax free. If you hold it for 4 years, you gotta pay capital gains. And I didn't know about that when I was trying to sell my company, and I found out about it like right before I sold. And had we it gone through and had we been prepared, we might have sold it 4 years into the company. And luckily, I sold my company 5 years and 2 weeks after I started it, which allowed me to qualify for QSBS. Right now, under the Big Beautiful Bill, they changed it a little bit, and now it goes. First of all, the tax incentive is to 15 million, and they stagger it. So if you sell it after 3 years, you get a percentage of that tax break. But it used to be that it was all or nothing, and when I sold, it was all or nothing. And I was very lucky that it got delayed a little bit to let me cash in on that tax
Wow.
incentive.
Oh, talking major hashgacha pratis. That's incredible. So, with our little bit of time that we have left, it's very exciting. You started a company, you grew the company, you sold the company, and then post exit is a whole new life. Like there you were, your whole life was your startup for so many years, and all of a sudden the company is sold, and it's done. What is some wisdom? I mean, this is a very rare occurrence. Very few people have the end up having this type of experience in their life. But how do you navigate that next stage?
So I ended up wondering a little bit, but it's okay to wonder. Suddenly you get to think about things that you never had time or energy to think about. Um, you get to be much more in tune with your values, or like just learning about what you're doing because you're pressured to do, or what you're doing because you want to do. Um, it's it's an opportunity. It could be a little bit hard sometimes not to have uh, that thing that you're working on for a while, and I was trying to get out of that for a little bit, and it was hard for me until I found this project I'm working on. Um, but it, I mean, it comes with its challenges, but ultimately it's very beautiful to be able to have the opportunity to um, explore the world without the pressures of needing to build to build something, or just having that little break. I believe in the concept of shmita. You could take a year off every so often, but as long as it's only a year, and if it drags on too long, it could be a little frustrating.
Right. So I know you spent some time exploring the startup scene in Eretz Yisrael. Is there anything interesting that you would share from that experience? What did you learn from the
Um,
startup land,
yeah, it's.
startup nation?
I mean, Startup Nation, they're very good with deep tech, or with like complicated technology problems. Um, I think if it's something that's like not super hard to build, and it's just th- then being local to a market, the Israeli startups are always trying to sell to another market because it's a very small market, Israel. So I think it's harder if you're trying to do something which is, let's say, my business, technology enabled. So yes, there's technology, but it's not like a super complex tech problem. You're competing more with, service, or being close to customers. So that makes it harder to run from Israel. But there's definitely great stuff. What I realized more from my own journey is that the distraction of being around all these startup conferences could be a little hard to find your own thing, because as soon as you have an idea, you get distracted by the next one. Um, and um, it's like sometimes it's a balance of being able to be in the scene, be in Startup Nation, being around other people trying to build startups, and then being not around that scene and thinking about giving your idea more time and seeing what you could build. So that was, yeah, it's a balance.
Okay, so now in our last little segment over here, so you're now found the next project that you're working on. What could you share a little bit about that if you're able to?
Sure. So I'm working on, it's called DrivePay, where I was working on parking enforcement, but a lot of times people want to pay for parking and they don't, because not because they want to steal parking, but because the parking apps could be a little frustrating to work sometimes. So we're trying to make that easier by tracking where cars go, and then automating the parking system, when automating the parking payment whenever they park. So we want to give people an experience a little bit like Easy Pass, that you don't think about tolls. Once you have an Easy Pass, it like just happens every time you pass a toll, and you don't need to go on an app and say, "Oh, I went through this toll today. I went through that toll today." So we're trying to give parkers that experience. That's the startup I'm working on. And then I'm also excited to be working on Crown Ventures and giving entrepreneurs like me that needed, just a little bit of money to prove their concepts, an address to turn to. That was also a little hard, not knowing.
Yeah, if I could just embellish on what you just said, I'm very honored that Levy, together with the two other partners, CHY is a nonprofit, and we help people through mentorship and through guidance. But there are some promising startups that with it could benefit from investment to take them to the next level. So Levy and Daniel Kotler and Danny Fishman have created Crown Ventures.vc to invest in early stage promising tech startups coming out of the yeshiva backed community. So that's
Yeah, that's
honored and
been,
excited.
and it's a nice full circle moment to be doing it with Daniel, who helped me get started straight out of yeshiva, and it's really nice to be working with him. He's done a lot more angel investments than me, and it's nice to work with him to be able to fund promising ideas. So that's special, and it's nice to give back to the community the way I could. And it's really nice to partner with you. You helped me get started as well, so it's nice to it's a nice full circle moment being able to work with CHY to help fund more startups.
Okay, wonderful. So it's been a wonderful conversation, and we're looking forward to the growth of your new startup and everything and all the projects you're working on.
Thank you.